with the fact, my friends, that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now.
Stand up for progress. Stand up for justice. And stand up if you know, like I know, that we're stronger together. Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening. It's so good to see you this evening, and we are excited about the exclamation point to an amazing MLK week-long celebration. Why don't we give ourselves a round of applause for participating in so many amazing events. My name is Sean Palmer. I serve as the director of the Upper Mid-African American Cultural Center, I guess as it says right here in these pictures. And let me begin by welcoming you. Martin Luther King's civil rights movement could not have happened without young people. Some have even suggested that the civil rights movement was jump-started because youth like Emmett Till were violently murdered in southern landscapes. Even during the height of the movement, there were 4 little girls who went to church in Birmingham, Alabama one morning and never returned. Their names are Addie Mae Collins, Denise McNair, Carol Robertson, and Cynthia Wesley. And even on a college campus like South Carolina State University, where students sought to protest the need to desegregate a local bowling alley, students Samuel Ephesians Hammond Jr., Delano Herman Middleton, Henry Ezekiel Smith lost their lives in what would become known as the Orangeburg Massacre. Be clear, King's civil rights movement wasn't just a movement of established pastors, educators, and businessmen seeking to move our country forward. This movement was collective, because young men and women were also living in a world that stymied their dreams even as it proclaimed freedom. And their parents wanted to bequeath to them a better world, better than the one that they had found. You see, everybody had stake in this movement. And so students at Bennett College for Women and North Carolina A&T jump-started the sit-ins in Greensboro, leading to a nationwide movement. Teenagers known as the Little Rock Nine integrated schools in Little Rock, Arkansas, and people saw how poorly black people could be treated for just wanting to have an education. Ella Baker and many children at the historic Shaw University in our state created the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee known as SNCC in an effort to raise awareness and activism in collegiate students across the country. And young men and women here, named for the famed Wilmington 10, sought for equity in New Hanover County schools. And so the children went to jail. The children marched, the children sang, the children advocated, the children protested. The children have always been present and an active part of our storied histories in America. This year, we've been thinking a lot about what the world would look like when we hand it over to our children, as we have endeavored to think about what it means to have a future. We've been thinking about this through the lens of what it means of an Afrofuturism kind of lens. We've been asking ourselves, what will this world look like in 20 years, or 40 years, or 60 years, or 100 years? And tonight is no exception to this question. So we look to the son of a civil rights advocate. We look to the son of a child of the Gullah Coast, a former SGA president, a Morehouse man, a CNN commentator, a young political icon, a lawyer, a husband, and a father. To help us peer into the future, we have posed the question for our speaker tonight, using Martin Luther King's profound quote as the backdrop for the program. King offers, "We are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now in this unfolding conundrum of life and history. There is such a thing as being too late. This is not the time for apathy or complacency. This is not the time for vigorous and positive action. And for my fellow South Carolinian, my fellow Atlanta University Center alumni, my fellow former Student Government Association president, and a fellow Black father, we lean into the question, what if tomorrow is today? Where shall we go from here? Brothers and sisters and everyone in between, let us prepare to hear from a youthful political icon as he translates a prophetic future for us to point the way on how we must work today. For as our title says, there is a fierce urgency in our current state. There is a fierce urgency in our now. Good evening and welcome to UNCW's annual Martin Luther King Lecture. And now I have the great privilege of introducing the Williston Alumni Choral Ensemble. Formed in 1984, the Williston Alumni Choral Ensemble is comprised of members from several classes from Williston High School, the formerly historically Black high school in Wilmington, the best school under the sun. Yes, make some noise. Nationally recognized, this choir ensemble has performed all across the country, including at the White House in 1994. Ladies and gentlemen, why don't you recognize them by giving them a round of applause as they come forward to lift us up in song.
For see what the end will be. Done made my vow to the Lord, and I never will turn back. Oh, I will go, I shall go, to see what the end will be. When every star refused to shine, to see what the end will be. I know King Jesus will be mine, to see what the end will be. Done made my vow to the Lord, and I never will turn back. Oh, I will go, I shall go, to see what the end will be. Done made my vow to the Lord, done made my vow to the Lord, done made my vow to the Lord, to see what the end will be. Done made my vow to the Lord, done made my vow to the Lord, done made my vow to the Lord, to see what the end will, see what the end will. Done made my vow to the Lord, yes. Done made my vow to the Lord, done made my vow to the Lord, to see what the end will, see what the end will. Done made my vow to the Lord, done made my vow to the Lord, done made my vow to the Lord, to see what the end will, see what the end will. Done made my vow to the Lord, done made my vow to the Lord, done made my vow to the Lord, to see what the end will be. To see what the end will be. To see what the end will be.
Good evening, everyone. It is so nice to see so many people here with us tonight. My name is Alexis Landrum. I'm a senior, about to graduate, but I also, thank you, thank you. That means a lot. I'm also the current Black Student Union president here on campus, and I have the honor and privilege to welcome our beloved guest tonight. Bakari Sellers was born in 1984 and raised in Denmark, South Carolina. The son of civil rights activist Cleveland Sellers, Bakari graduated from the South Carolina public school system and then proceeded to Morehouse College. While at Morehouse College, he was elected Student Government Association president and served on the college's board of trustees. After graduating from Morehouse College in 2005, Sellers attended the University of South Carolina School of Law, where he received his degree in 2008. Bakari Sellers has worked for the United States Congressman James Clyburn and former Atlanta Mayor Shirley Franklin. He was one of the youngest state representatives and the youngest Black elected official in the United States. Sellers has had extensive leadership experience working for the Democratic Leadership Council as well as Obama for America. While he worked in the South Carolina House of Representatives, he represented the 90th District from 2006 to 2014. He also ran for Lieutenant Governor of South Carolina. In 2015, he married Ellen Rucker Carter and recently had twins and became the father of 3. The next voice you will hear after the Williston Alumni Choir is none other than Bakari Sellers. So please join me in giving him a warm welcome.
vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He has loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Gloria, Gloria. Glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. I have seen him marching, the watchfires marching, through his 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 marching, Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. Christ was born across the sea with the glory in his bosom that transfigures you and me. As he died to make men holy, let us die to make men free, while God is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching
I was sitting in the back and I said, man, they must have rehearsal every Wednesday like we did when we grew up and Saturday. They get their rehearsals in, don't you? I got to say amen to that. Well, good evening. It is an honor and a privilege and a pleasure and every other adjective you can possibly think of to describe how I feel about being here with you all today. I am from the big city of Denmark, South Carolina, where we have 3 stoplights and a blinking light. And my mom and dad would always say that the 2 most important words in the English language are the words, thank you, because they're not nearly said enough. And so before I begin, I want to say thank you to a few people. To Sean Palmer, who came out here and I thought he was giving the keynote. I just want to say thank you for inviting me and having me here at this August occasion. To Manny Lloyd. Manny is the reason that I'm here. He's a young man who is from Wilmington, went to school at UNCW and still works here today. And it was a privilege and a pleasure to work with someone as professional as him in bringing me to this university. So you all are producing some amazing young black men who are leaders on this campus. So thank you so very much, Manny. And to Miss Alexis, thank you for my introduction. And to all of you all here, I don't know if we have any elected officials or city government or local government or state government. I know many times it's a thankless job or what school administrators are here, but I didn't know what to expect when I was coming to Wilmington, North Carolina after the devastation that you all went through this past fall and winter. And I simply want to say thank you to everyone who had a hand in lifting this community back up. I know we're not there yet, but we will get there. And the last thing I want to do is say thank you to all of you all who are here under the sound of my voice, because in the words of the great American poet Sean Carter, also known as Jay-Z, you could have been anywhere in the world, but you chose to be here with us tonight. So thank you so very much. You know, I want to have a conversation. I've been tasked with this challenge where we are talking about the fierce urgency of now. But for me, I want to, on this day where we celebrate a man like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I think it's only right that we start with just a hint of breaking news. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was murdered. You know, oftentimes many people like to say that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave his life. Well, that just ain't true. Dr. King's life was taken from us in the most hateful, vile way that it can be taken. And we're going to tell the truth tonight. But I do believe that Dr. King wanted us to be on a journey. I believe that he thought, as I do, that life is not a singular step, but life is a collection of steps. Life is a journey. And tonight we are going to take a journey, but every journey has to have a destination. And so for the purposes of this journey this evening, we are going to have a journey to excellence. Our goal, our destination is nothing short of excellence. Now, I am going to have to apologize beforehand, Sean, for you bringing me all the way up here and me bombarding you with questions that are rooted in such simplicity, but I believe they're necessary to answer as we navigate this journey to excellence. The first is, how far have we come? And the next is, where do we go from here? Now, in asking ourselves the first question of how far have we come, I think it's imperative and important that we use some historical context. And for me, I like to think back to 1946. And there was a young man named George Elmore. You see, George Elmore was a Renaissance Negro. He was a Renaissance Negro because he owned a five and dime store. He owned a liquor store. He had a cab company and took pictures on the side. But you see, George was so fair-skinned that he could pass for being white. So in 1946, George Elmore had the audacity to go down and attempt to register to vote. And he actually got his voter registration card. And during that fall, he attempted to vote in the first Democratic primary he could find. But the poll worker said, "George, we know you're a Negro. You can't vote here." But George was a very prideful man, and so he put his shoulders up and he decided he was going to file a lawsuit. It was known as Elmore versus Rice. But as soon as he did, his liquor store was firebombed. They stopped distributing to his five and dime store. His wife actually died in a mental health facility because she had to undergo the trauma of having crosses burned on her yard night after night. You see, George Elmore, he soon died a very broken man, emotionally, financially, mentally, and physically. But Elmore versus Rice is the reason that African Americans can vote in primaries in the South. So ask yourself that very simple question: how far have we come? I like to think about one of the baddest women I've ever known. Her name was Sarah Mae Fleming. You see, in 1954, Sarah Mae Fleming was what they called to be a domestic worker. And after getting off work and cleaning up hotels one day, Sarah Mae Fleming decided that she was going to come downstairs, and when she got downstairs, she was going to get on the bus because she wanted to go home. And this story may sound familiar to many of you all. When Sarah got on the bus, she sat down on the first open seat she could find. But that wasn't her sin sitting at the front of the bus. Her sin was that when the bus driver told her to get up, she didn't go out the back door that the Negroes use. She went out the front door, and the bus driver punched her in the stomach and rolled her down the steps. And I dare not try to be a pastor. In fact, my grandfather, who was a Baptist minister, used to always tell me to leave the preaching to the pastor, and I'll do that. But it does remind me of Isaiah when he was in the full awe and glory of the Lord, and the question was asked, "Who shall go for me?" And he responded, "Here am I, Lord, send me." You see, Sarah Mae Fleming was not looking to be a heroine that day. She was not looking to be a part of history that day, but she was called and she said, "Here am I, Lord, send me." She joined some enterprising young lawyers from the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and filed a suit. And Sarah Mae Fleming, she laid the foundation and the groundwork in action and law for another young lady who sat down on a bus some 17 months later named Rosa Parks. So since Sarah Mae Fleming, ask yourself that very simple question: how far have we come? And then not too far away from here, down 95 in a small community called Clarendon County, South Carolina, you have the Briggs family. Now, the young people in this room, millennials and Generation Zers, you all have heard your grandparents tell the story about having to walk uphill both ways to school. Well, back in 1949, the Briggs family literally sometimes had to walk 9 miles one way to school. And so these parents, they got together, and all they wanted to do was have black kids have the same opportunity as white kids to ride school buses to school. And so they joined together and they filed this lawsuit known as Briggs v. Elliott. Briggs v. Elliott was filed in 1949. It was the first case filed in the landmark collection of cases known as Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. And if you think back to Brown versus the board, you remember Chief Justice Warren got a very rare unanimous opinion in which he held that segregation causes a sense of inferiority by placing children in environments not conducive to learning. So again, ask yourself that very simple question: how far have we come? You know, for me, I think back to George Elmore and the price that he paid so that he would have access to the ballot, so that he could exercise his franchise to vote. He literally gave up everything he had, every ounce of his being. Had to see his wife die like she did. And I think about today how individuals try to keep us from exercising that franchise, how they do everything they can in their power to keep us from the ballot box. And even more importantly, I think about how many people in my generation do not understand the price that was paid, understand the challenges that are set forth, and understand the power that we have in that right to vote, not just electing new people to serve us, but also ensuring that we're represented in the jury box. So again, I ask myself that very simple question: since George Elmore, how far have we come? And then I think about Sarah Mae Fleming, and all she wanted was access to public transportation. And I think about the fact that many black and brown people in this country, many poor people, do not have access to public transportation or affordable housing. They don't have access to clean air or clean water. What if I told you there are 100 communities in these United States of America that have a higher lead concentration in their water than Flint, Michigan? So I ask myself that very simple question: how far have we come? And then I think about the Briggs family and everything they sacrificed so that their kids would just have an opportunity to receive an education. And I think about the fact right now we live in communities where kids go to school and their heating and air don't work, where their infrastructure is falling apart, where teachers are overworked and underpaid, where we literally still have corridors of shame that are just not in South Carolina, but in Compton, California, and everywhere in between. So again, I ask myself that very simple question: how far have we come? To the alumni choir, I have come to the resolve that in my 34 years of great wisdom, the answer to the question, how far have we come, is that we've made progress, but we still have yet a ways to go. So now on this journey to excellence, after we've asked ourselves this first question, we have to pivot and ask ourselves the next question, which is the most difficult for us to answer. The next question is, where do we go from here? See, this question bothers me because I like to believe that I can grapple with and figure out the answer to anything. But this is oftentimes very elusive. In fact, I go back to Dr. King and I remind myself that Dr. King, in one of his best pieces of writing, actually asked this question of where do we go from here. I oftentimes say that it's its second best piece of writing. And no, the best piece of writing is not the I Have a Dream speech. If you believe that, we can fight later. His best piece of writing is the letter from the Birmingham jail. His second best piece of writing, though, was this book entitled Where Do We Go From Here? And it was amazing because Dr. King, he always gives us these lofty goals. He's a great minister because he never gives his congregation too much. You know how you're sitting sometimes out in your pews and you don't know what your preacher just said, but you just want to feel like he was talking to you? But Dr. King always gave us something that we could soak up, and he gave us two choices. He said, where we go from here, we can either have chaos or we can have community. Chaos or community. Now, it's not hard to believe that we are on the brink of chaos. All you got to do is look at the front page of your papers or turn on CNN, where you usually see me in this little box. And under the box, it just has, breaking news, and usually it can just say chaos. Chaos here, chaos at 1600, chaos in DC. Right now, I have to look in the eyes of TSA workers and figure out what they're going through, because I know this will be the second paycheck they will get that literally says $0. Or our members of the Coast Guard who are going out and serving our country who still will not get paid. Or the federal workers who, no matter whether or not you're on furlough or not, you know what's going to happen, rent will still be due. No matter what's going on in the Middle East, or no matter what's going on at the Lincoln Memorial, we can always look around and see chaos all around us. But you see, the challenge for everyone in this room, myself included, is to build community. The challenge we have is to build community. Let me tell you a story about a young man who was born at 633 Frederick Street, Denmark, South Carolina. When he was 10 years old, something happened that fundamentally changed his life. When he was 10 years old, he says that he encountered the most powerful woman in the civil rights movement. It was Emmett Till's mother. You see, when he was 10 years old, Emmett Till was brutally murdered, slain, lynched in Mississippi. And he reminds us that she was so powerful because she allowed the world to see what racism and bigotry had done to her son. Now, I don't know if any of all of you all have seen Emmett Till's face, but please take your phones out and Google a picture of his face. I don't care if you take your phones out while I speak. I have stock in Verizon, so it's okay. But he ripped out this picture because all of you all of a certain age remember Jet Magazine, and Jet Magazine had that picture of Emmett Till, and you see he ripped it out. And it spurred his engagement in what they called the freedom movement. He, like some of you all in this room, although many of you all may have forgotten, was a part of the Emmett Till generation. And you see, he joined his local NAACP and he began to lead some youth sit-ins in the area. But his parents, they were middle class, and they owned a motel, they owned a fried fish store and a cab company, and they had to get him out of town, get him out of the South, because they not only felt fear for his safety, but their economic mobility as well. And so there's a little bit of irony. They packed him up and they sent him to Howard University. And when he got to Howard University, he befriended a man named Stokely Carmichael. And Stokely graduated from Howard, but then convinced this young man from Denmark to drop out of school. So he did. He dropped out of school and helped found this little organization that Sean was talking about, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as SNCC. And his first mission was to go to Miami University of Ohio. See, Miami University of Ohio is where they trained civil rights workers before they went down to the Mississippi Delta to register voters during Freedom Summer. And then he got a phone call that 3 of his friends had gone missing. Goodman, Schroeder, and Cheney. And so he had to lead the search missions for their bodies down in Philadelphia, Mississippi. How many people have been to Philadelphia, Mississippi? It's the size of this auditorium. Not much bigger. During the day, they would hide in barns and sheds, and at night they would go out and look in ditches and trenches. Ironically enough, they found the bodies of these 3 fellow slain civil rights workers behind the home of Edgar Ray Killen, who was a local sheriff's deputy and minister in the town. That was this young man from Denmark's first indoctrination into the civil rights movement. Until he came home and became a part of the most deadly civil rights demonstration this country has ever seen. I have to say it a little bit louder for the people in the back, but he became a part of the most deadly civil rights demonstration this country has ever seen. Because you see, on the night of February 6, 1968, the students at South Carolina State College, as it was known at the time, decided they were going to protest the All-Star Bowling Alley. And I know we heard a little bit of the story earlier, but I'll share it with you in full. You see, the All-Star Bowling Alley is what the history books call Jim Crow's final hiding place, the last vestige of discrimination in Little Orangeburg, South Carolina. To make it a little clearer for some of you all, it's on Russell Street, right across from the Dario, where they had those real good pineapple milkshakes. And see, it sits back in a right angle. And on February 6th, the students decided they were going to go down and protest. And so the students went down, and they actually had a plan of action. See, 3 students were supposed to go in, take a seat, and get arrested. And they were going to fight these injustices in the court of law. But when they got there and they began to clap and chant and sing protest hymns, city police had already positioned themselves inside of the bowling alley, and some had begun to surround many of the students. And as the students began to protest and get louder, city police began to press up against the students, and the students began to press up against the glass, and then the glass broke. When the glass broke, all hell broke loose. Many of the students were beaten that night, but they weren't beaten with normal police batons. Instead, they were beaten with batons that were about this long, and at the end, they had these leather rawhide whips. There's a good friend of mine named John Stroman who tells a story about seeing 2 state troopers being held while 2 state troopers holding one co-ed while another one beat her. You see, the students that night, they had to go back and they had to heal not only their physical wounds, but their mental wounds and emotional wounds as well. And then came February 7th, 1968. I think older people like to say the tension was so thick, you can cut it with a knife. But for me, I remind people it's kind of like when UNCW, you're playing your rival, and after the basketball game, you're in the parking lot and you feel like something about to pop off. It's a little uneasy. That's how it felt on the 7th. But nothing happened. Then came that fateful day of February 8th, 1968, when the students decided they were going to go down and protest the bowling alley again, but this time when the state troopers and city police came, they got the right idea and they went back to their campus. You see, they went back to their campus. They went back to their campus because they had faith in their numbers. They had faith in their communion because they had gathered together, much as we have gathered here tonight, for a singular cause and a common good, but they could not foresee what would happen next. You see, they built this huge bonfire, and you can imagine how in February in South Carolina it's not too cold, but it's just kind of cool, and how the warmth from the fire, it warms your bones ever so gently, and the embers illuminate the darkness. But the students could not foresee that South Carolina state troopers would line up along the embankment in front of their beloved campus. They did not foresee that they would have shotguns that were loaded with deadly double-aught buckshots of the same bullets we used to hunt deer. They did not foresee that they were turned on them or would be turned on them with deadly intent. And for 8 seconds, 1001, 1002, 1003, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 shots were fired into the group of students. It killed 3, Henry Smith, Samuel Hammond, and Delano Middleton. It wounded another 28. This young man from Denmark was actually shot in the shoulder that night. And he went to the infirmary, and when he got to the infirmary, they told him there was nothing they could do for him there. Said he had to go to the hospital. When he got to the hospital, he was pointed out by the only black sheriff's deputy in Orangeburg County at the time, and he was arrested. He was arrested and charged with 5 felony counts, looking at a maximum of 75 years in prison. He was deemed to be an outside agitator, a rabble-rouser, because he was a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. In between the time of his trial in February 8th, 1968, all 9 officers who fired shots into the group of students were tried. All of them found not guilty. This young man from Denmark actually went to trial, and when he got there, the lead investigator from the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division said that he had misplaced the evidence because of the time that had passed between February 8th and the time of his trial. He said, and although I have misplaced the evidence, it is my testimony today that I do recall this young man who was here in this courtroom, not on the night of the 8th, but on the night of the 6th, standing on top of a fire truck, lighting a bic and saying, "Burn, baby, burn." So his indictment was backdated from February 8th to February 6th. And he was charged, tried, and convicted of rioting, becoming the first and only one-man riot in the history of this country. You see, on that night, injustice, it left mothers without their sons. It left the pages of my state's history stained red with blood. But if you look at this young man from Denmark today and you ask him what is the greatest sacrifice he had to make, he'll tell you that the greatest sacrifice he had to make was not being in jail or losing his freedom per se. It wasn't even being housed on death row while his bond was denied after his arrest on February 8th. But the greatest sacrifice he had to make was being in jail for the birth of his oldest daughter, or my big sister, because this young man from Denmark who grew up into a civil rights hero is my father, Cleveland Sellers. And you see the lessons that I learned from people like Henry Smith and Samuel Hammond and Delano Middleton and Ella Baker and Fannie Lou Hamer and Jimmy Lee Jackson and Julian Bond and Marion Berry and James Foreman, Shirley Chisholm, John Lewis, Andy Young. All of the names of these heroes and heroines, even before you get to Malcolm, Martin, and Rosa, is that the answer to the question, where do we go from here, lies fundamentally in the ability for us to do 2 things. 2 things. The first is what I struggle with the most, and if you all have ever seen me on TV or understand that I'm still in my maturation process, it is what I struggle with the most. But it's a concept that we have to, again, especially on days like this, and please don't be church folk. And what I mean by church folk is, church folk go to church on Sunday, but they only Christians on Sunday. Or they celebrate King Day on Monday or Tuesday, but that's the only time they live with King in their heart, is that Monday or Tuesday. Because one of the things we have to do when we leave this room, especially now, especially in this time when we're trying to build community, but it feels like we are surrounded with chaos, we have to rededicate ourselves to the proposition of loving our neighbor. But I'm not finished yet. Because we have to love our neighbors even when they do not love us. That's something I struggle with, but it's something that is necessary and mandated of us as we celebrate on a day like today, but live during these times that are now. In order to answer that question of where do we go from here, the first thing we have to do is love our neighbors even when they do not love us. And I'll be the first to tell you that's damn hard. Now, the second thing we have to do is what I like to say, we have to dream with our eyes open. Now, that's not just for young people in the room or students or children in the room. That's for all of you all, not just the young people, but the young at heart. We have to learn how to dream with our eyes open. And the reason being is because we live in a culture of low expectation. And what's more certain than we live in a culture of low expectation is oftentimes we get what we expect. You see, I'm from the school of belief that you cannot tell a kid that he can be a black doctor if he ain't never seen one. You cannot expect a kid to grow up and want to be a black lawyer if he ain't never seen one. We have to teach people that they can dream with their eyes open. And because I don't want to leave you with just a whole bunch of rhetoric, let me explain to you what that means. When I was 20 years old, I had come downstairs and I knew that I had just graduated from Morehouse College and I wanted to live in a legacy of those people like Dr. King. I wanted to live in a legacy where I could be a change agent. Now, it didn't matter what I wanted to do in my life, but I just knew that I wanted to be a change agent. And so I had decided I was going to run for office. Now, I come downstairs, and I'm 20 years old, and I'm full of swag. I had a bunch of swag back then. And I'll never forget we have a cook island and a wet bar, and I'm standing in between the wet bar and the cook island, and my mom is cooking spaghetti, and my dad is doing something that old people do that I don't understand. He's reading the newspaper at night, which I don't know why they do that. If you read the newspaper in the evening, that news is pretty old. But I gather myself up and I'm saying, Dad, Mom, Dad, I'm going to run for the South Carolina House of Representatives against Thomas Rhodes. Thomas Rhodes was 82 years old, had been in office for 26 years, which was longer than I had been born, and before he was in the State House, he was the chair of county council. Before he was the chair of county council, he was the mail delivery man, and before he delivered the mail, he delivered the milk. So literally everybody in the county knew who he was. And it's a true story. My mom, she took a break from stirring the sauce, and she looked up and she said, "I'd vote for you." And my dad, without missing a beat, said, "I'd think about it." And so I go out and I knock on over 2,600 doors, and during this presidential season where everybody and their mama's running for president, I remember having to explain this to my friend Cory Booker, because in Denmark, South Carolina, like the poor rural South, we don't have places where people live on top of each other. When you knock on 2,600 doors, you knock on a door, you drive a mile, and then you knock on another door. So I was proud of my number. And I'll never forget June 13, 2006. That was election day. And it was raining cats and dogs and pigs and turkeys and everything else. And everyone came out and they said, "I don't think you're going to win, but I voted for you anyway." It just happened to be 55% of the vote. And I ended up being the youngest black elected official in the country from Denmark, South Carolina. And the strangest thing about that, the strangest thing about that was something amazing was happening in our world. You see, there was this big race for president going on that time. You remember Bill Richardson and Hillary Clinton, and Dennis Kucinich, John Edwards, and Joe Biden, and Barack Obama. Everyone was running for president of the United States. And so I'm getting all of these calls because people want me to endorse them. Not only is South Carolina the first primary in the South, but here I am, the youngest black elected official, youngest state legislator. I'm feeling like a 5-star athlete. Everybody's recruiting me. And I remember I narrowed my choices down to 2 people. It was either going to be John Edwards or Barack Obama, and let's just say I'm glad I made the right choice. And I was the only state legislator with a book bag. And I would go back and forth between the state capitol and the law school. And I never forget, I was on my way to constitutional law class and my phone rang and it was a private number. And Manny, I'm gonna take a moment of personal privilege here. This is not a part of my remarks, but this is a PSA for the students in the room. If somebody calls you from a private number, it's one of 2 people. Either it's somebody very important or it's a student loan company calling to get their money back. So please act accordingly. But I remember it was a private number and I picked up the phone and they said, this is Senator Obama, do you have a moment to speak to him? And I said, of course. I had met the senator and his wife many times before. And I got on the phone and I had a small brain freeze because, you know, Senator Obama used to teach constitutional law and I hadn't read, and so I didn't want to be bogged down in what we were doing in class. And Senator Obama said, well, you know, now is the time. I want you to endorse me to be president of the United States. I say, I will do so, sir, under 2 conditions. I said, 1 is that you come to my district, and 2 is that my mother gets an opportunity to work on the campaign. The senator tells me done and done. And so I get an opportunity to travel around the country on behalf of then Senator Barack Obama. And then they call me again and say, you know, the senator wants to make good on his promise. He wants to come to your district. The only problem was I represented a little bit of Orangeburg County, all of Bamberg County, a little bit of Barnwell County. In short, that means I didn't have a place to put Barack Obama. And so we call up South Carolina State, which is just on the outside of my district, and we have this event in a gymnasium known as SHM Auditorium, named after the 3 young men killed in the Orangeburg Massacre. It's amazing how life comes full circle. And so I'll never forget that day. We pull up, we're a few weeks out from the primary, and this is at the height of Obama mania. This is January of 2008. This is before the South Carolina primary, and we have people coming from miles around. They're coming from North Carolina and Virginia. They're coming from Tennessee. They're coming from Arkansas, all over the place because they want to just touch the proverbial hem of his garment. And I walk in, and I have State House security with me, and I walk into what was the green room, but it was the men's basketball locker room. And sitting down was Chris Tucker and Kerry Washington. And so me, Chris Tucker, and Kerry Washington are just laughing and having a good time. And if anybody is an elected official in the room, one thing you know about politics, everything is late. And so we're sitting there and we're waiting on Barack Obama, and my good friend Rick Wade comes in, and Rick says, Bakari, I got to run to the airport. I will be right back. And so he runs to the airport and he comes back with Usher. So it's me, Usher, Chris Tucker. I have pictures. This is a true story. So it's me, Usher, Chris Tucker, and Kerry Washington, and we're sitting there and we're waiting on Barack Obama. And they're out there playing Ain't No Mountain High Enough. The gymnasium is packed. There's a small stage at center court, very small, and the lights are beaming down. In the back, there's international media, and it's an arena, so people are all behind you. You have to speak in like a circle. We even have an overflow room that's across the way in another auditorium. And finally, the senator gets there, and he says, it's go time. And I speak all around the world, and very rarely do I get a great introduction like I got today from Miss Alexis. Usually I get what's called the VOG, which is the voice of God. That's when they come out and they say, and now, welcome to the stage, Representative Bakari Sellers. And I go out and people are pulling on you, and it's Secret Service everywhere, and you're autographing babies, and it's pure pandemonium. It's a feeling that you've never had before. And you go on stage, and I remember talking about Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. We had about 5 minutes, and the audience was quiet. They were captivated because I truly believe I'm a product of the proverb, it takes a village to raise a child, and although we had many people from elsewhere, my village was all in that building. And I talked about the I Have a Dream speech, but we get caught up in that rhythmic cadence of I have a dream that one day we shall, but we forget about the most important part of that speech in which he talks about the fierce urgency of now. And I talked about how we could exercise our franchise, how we could take advantage and take and seize that moment and dictate the path of not just Orangeburg, and not just Bamberg in South Carolina, but the entire country, and create ripples for generations by electing the next president of the United States. Then I turned around and I introduced Chris Tucker, and the decibel level got a little bit louder, and Chris introduces Kerry Washington, and it got a little bit louder, and Kerry introduces Usher, and then all the women start passing out. And then Usher introduces Barack Obama, and we were supposed to stand on stage while the senator gave his stump speech. But he looked over at us and he said, you know what? It's a little too loud. Y'all gonna have to get off stage. But before we do, we take this picture. To my left is Chris Tucker. To my right is the 44th President of the United States of America. To his right was Kerry Washington, and to her right was Usher Raymond. And people always ask me, what were you thinking at that moment? And I was very clear. You know how the Lord gives you these moments of clarity. I was only 19 miles away from where I had this desire and dream to be a change agent, and had the audacity to believe that it wasn't about what my community was or what it is, but what it could be. And how I had the purest of intentions not to be a politician, but to be a public servant. And go out and be this change agent and let my parents know that this is what I wanted to do. I made that decision 19 miles away. Even more importantly, what was weighing heavy on my heart was that I was 300 yards away from where the blood of my family literally ran through the soil, where my father was shot, where 3 young men were killed because they had the audacity to believe that they could bowl to. And although I was 300 yards away from where the blood ran through the soil, and I was 19 miles away from where I decided I was going to dream, I had gone so far. You see, ladies and gentlemen, that is the concept of dreaming with your eyes open. It's allowing your dreams to take you outside of the gates of your university. It's allowing your dreams to take you outside of the confines of your zip code. It's allowing your dreams and your steps to be ordered so that you too can be change agents. And as we take this journey to excellence and we ask ourselves the first question, which is, how far have we come? We don't have to be 50, 60, or 70 years old to understand that the answer to the question is that we've made progress, but we still have yet a ways to go. And then we pivot and we ask ourselves the next question, which is, where do we go from here? And we have to do that thing which is really hard, which is love even when they don't love us. Love even when they spit in our face, and love even when they dislike who we love or hate the color of our skin or the God that we worship to. We still have to respond with love. And then we have to be able to sit back and dream with our eyes open and understand that we too can change the world. But then and only then can we get to our goal. Then and only then can we get to our destination, which is excellence. Now, the problem with giving a speech like this during a moment like this is sometimes I fail to define what I am talking about. Because I would end the speech right here, say thank you and God bless, and 99% of y'all don't know what excellence really means. So I just gave a full speech and wanted to take you all somewhere, and you still don't know where we're going. But excellence is this. Excellence is what Dr. King expected of us. Excellence is what all of those individuals who paid that price, who laid on those jailhouse floors, who smelled those bullets, who had to go to funerals and buried their loved ones, they deserve of us. And with all due respect to all the educators in the room, the greatest educator of all time is a young man named Benjamin Elijah Mays. Without Benjamin E. Mays, there would be no Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And Benjamin E. Mays said, in all things that you do them so well that no man living, dead, or yet to be born can do them better. You see, that there, as we say in Denmark, that there is the definition of excellence. That there is our goal. That is the journey that we are on. And ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you this as I close. On this journey to excellence, you may not see your name in lights. You may not be rich. But my hope is that somebody somewhere looking down upon me will simply be able to say, job well done, my son. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Good evening. When I got a call from Sean to come and give remarks after such a great ML King celebration week, I'm humbled. As I stand in the shoes of my father, the first African American to run for constable in Wilmington, North Carolina, and my beloved mother, Miss Thelma Smith Briggs, I want to thank you for all of your participation from the 14th of January to today, January the 22nd, here at UNCW, for supporting the dream of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The weather did hamper us some. For others, they wrapped up and celebrated. I think Dr. King would be proud of us. For as long as we have been celebrating Dr. King's birthday, this region, southeastern North Carolina, has really stood up and represented Dr. King very well. And I thank you. And I'm going to close with this. At the end of the day, it's not the words of your enemies, it's the silence of your friends.
Good evening, everyone. As I stand before you on this evening, I'm humbled and I'm grateful to have the privilege of following behind this prolific speaker that we heard tonight and this other prolific speaker and mover and shaker in our community, Brother Hollis Briggs. It truly is a testament of the work of our community that we are able to do exactly what Bakari suggested, and that is to become a community and rise above the chaos. I too stand before you tonight as a proud and an humbled fruit of the greatest school under the sun, Wilson Senior High School. My father was an alumnus of Williston, and he often talked about his days in the Glee Club, and he often demonstrated in the shower that he still had the remnants of the talent that was developed as a singer at Williston, and the pride and the joy of being a part of Williston and the distance where he walked from all the way from Nixon Street to 10th Street. And he did it with pride. And he instilled in me that if you would strive to do your best, to do the kind of things that Dr. King spoke about in so many of his speeches and the kind of things that he lived with his life, that there's nothing you can't achieve. And so tonight, I can also say that as a result of the efforts of so many, particularly Dr. King as an example, my father was able to become a little boy from Nixon Street, going through Williston Senior High School and Peabody Elementary School, and came back to become the first African American to serve as Director of Vocational Education for New Hanover County Schools. And then he went to Rocky Point, North Carolina, and married a young lady by the name of Mary Lee Royals, my mother, who became the first district advisor for home economics in the FHA club in her district. And then they birthed a son who became the first African American male to serve as district court judge in the 5th Judicial District since Reconstruction. And so tonight, we do see that dreams can become realities. Dr. King was not just a dreamer, he was a doer. He was not just a drum major for peace. He was that too. He was not just a civil rights activist. He was that too. But he was a doer. And his family would want the world to know, from the books that we read about him, the articles that have been written about him, the historical documentation that have been made of him, the most prominent thing that is desired for the world to know about Dr. King is that he was a preacher. He was a preacher of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And from that, as a preacher, what he preached was the gospel, which means good news. Interestingly enough, the reason why his preaching evolved into civil rights activism is because the gospel is good news, but the gospel is justice. The gospel is equality. The gospel is peace. And as he spoke those words, lives changed for the better. The dreamer was a doer. And so for us to really pay him tribute, as we do, and as Bakari said, as we should do beyond Monday and beyond Tuesday, and as Hollis even emphasized, beyond just this week, to really pay him homage, this great man, this servant of God, this powerful, prolific prophet of the time that he came, then it's incumbent upon you and me to do our parts. Because the reality is this: if you and I can dream, then the dream that Dr. King talked about in 1963 will never die. Because all of us have the capacity to dream. And if we have the capacity to dream, then we have the capacity to do. And it starts by looking at ourselves individually. How can I make a difference? First of all, how can I change me? How can I eliminate my excuses? How can I become more inspired? How can I encourage myself, even when others may not? And so, as we bask in the powerful, awesome message that we heard on tonight, let us go from here. I would challenge myself and I would challenge you to say, Lord, show me who I can help. One of the favorite songs of Dr. King that inspired him and kept him going was the song, If I Can Help Somebody. And the lyrics of that contain the principles that guided his life. When he says, the song says, if I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with a word or song, if I can show somebody he's traveling wrong, then my living shall not be in vain. Our living is not in vain. We're here tonight because we understand the principle of reaching out and helping somebody. And may we do it as God gives us the grace. God bless you. And thank you for this opportunity.
I get to close, and I'm very happy to do so. From the opening video to the beautiful music, the inspiring and thoughtful and provoking words of our keynote speaker, the message of the urgency of now was vibrant and resounding. And it is in that spirit that I now want to thank you, the audience, for being part of tonight's event, where we were reconnected to the legacy of a truly great leader, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This event was made possible through the minds, the hearts, and souls of the Upperman African American Cultural Center staff. And I would like for you to give them a round of applause right now. There were also a lot of partners involved, and you got a chance to hear from some of the partners. I got to give a shout out to Ms. Linda Upperman Smith, the staff of the Office of the Arts, University Relations, the MLK Celebration Committee of Southeast North Carolina, the Williston Alumni Choir, and our honorary ushers, the Brothers of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity. So many student volunteers, our Student Government Association, and our Black Student Union. All of you all assisted in making this program a reality, and we thank you tremendously for that. And Mr. Sellers, if you're back in the room, could you please come to the stage and join us for a moment? Let's give it up right now. So your inspiring words in all 34 years of wisdom were right on point. And we thank you for the message, pointing us to the future, as well as connecting us to the past. And these are what really direct our calling to the time which is now. Small token of our appreciation. Safe travels back on your journey. So on behalf of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, I'm Kent Guyan, and I wish you all a pleasant evening tomorrow and safe travel on your journey. Let's practice loving our neighbors even as we leave the parking lot tonight. And with that, I wish you all a very good night. Thank you.